Welcome in to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to grandfathers, adult grandchildren, and experts in areas of importance to grandfathers. Whether you're a new grandfather, a seasoned pro, or somebody interested in learning about relationships, this is the place for you. So come on in, join us as we learn together, laugh together, and support each other on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. Welcome in. I'm excited to have you here. I hope you're having a great weekend, and I hope you're enjoying the springtime weather if you're living up in the Northern Hemisphere. My wife and I just got out onto the Nantahala River. It's in western North Carolina, and we had a blast. We're enjoying the warmer weather. We're getting out. We're doing a little whitewater kayaking. We're engaging back with friends. Everybody's kind of coming back out from their winter hibernation, let's say. So I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you guys an important conversation that I'm having with a gentleman all the way from Singapore. Now, Parcsen is here to talk about his experience with being a grandfather, but more importantly, he's here to share with us the 3 steps that he uses to help himself as well as other people reconnect with their fathers and reconnect even with other loved ones that they might have become a little bit distanced from. Those 3 R's that he's going to be talking to us about are recognizing the man or recognizing the person, realizing that they were a little boy, that they were a teenager, and a young adult who's trying to find their way in the world, and recognizing that those qualities are there, and those qualities are some of what led them into becoming your father and the person that was living with you and was raising you. The other part of that too is that we're going to talk about reconciliation and that process of after you recognize the individual for who they are and recognizing them as a person, being able to build those bridges back, rebuild bonds if they've been strained. And then finally, the 3rd R is to reconnect. And this is really important, to rebuild those healthy relationships, because as Parcsen talks to us about, it's not just affecting you and maybe your father, it's actually affecting you, your father, and your grandchildren, as well as the other relationships that you hold dear in your life. So this is going to be a great conversation. I know I've talked a little long on this, but I wanted to give you a sense of what's coming up. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Parcsen.
Welcome, Parcsen, to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm excited to have you on the show and talk about your experience with being a grandfather in Singapore, as well as some of these other topics we're going to get into about reconciliation with maybe our adult children or even our fathers.
Well, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation that we're going to have.
Absolutely. And I've talked with people from Australia, Netherlands, and Great Britain, and other places. So you're the first guest that I've had on from Singapore.
What an honor.
Well, you'll always be
do
a
you
first.
Want me to speak English or Singlish?
English is fine. I mean, if you want to Jesus,
all right, I'll try my best.
What I'd love for you to do is introduce yourself a little bit to us and let us know where you grew up and kind of what you do for a living. I know some of these details, but I'd love for you to share those with the audience.
All right. Well, number 1, I am Singaporean. I am Chinese. Now, I often have to say that because of my looks, and people do get confused that, whether I'm Chinese or not. So I always find I have to clarify. I have to state it up front. And I am a husband. I am a father of 3 children, and 2 of them are already adults. And 1 of them is married with kids, and therefore making me a grandfather and qualifying me to be on this podcast. And currently, I'm working with a non-profit organization called Center for Fathering, and our mission is to inspire fathers and equip them to be better dads.
Oh, I love it. That's great. I've been able to get in contact with a number of groups that are have a similar purpose as yours, helping men kind of come to grips with their roles as being a father or a grandfather, and how we can kind of share our experiences, learn from each other, as well as just become stronger in that role as a leader of our families.
Yeah, it's
Now,
very important. I think fathers are kind of neglected. We are always seen as, the ones supporting the wives, and we are men, we are supposed to be strong, and tough and things like that. But we are humans too.
oh, absolutely. And, as you point out in some of your blogs and some of your articles, one of the things too that we often forget about is that as fathers and grandfathers, we've also been young sons, we've been teenagers, we've been young adults, and we've made all sorts of mistakes and we've had all sorts of accomplishments. And so just because you're a father or grandfather doesn't mean that you fully understand everything in this complex world.
That's right. That's right. We need help. We need support. We need connections, especially because fathering can be quite a lonely task. You do it by yourself, and you are with the kids, and you go to work, and then you come home, and you're with the kids again. Yeah. So one of the things I try to do is create a space, a place for fathers to come and connect with one another. And like you say, share with each other, compare notes, learn from each other. Our trade secrets.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the biggest things that I've found when talking with people about men's mental health is how, as men tend to get older, our network of friends and people that we can talk to seems to shrink quite a bit. And, having an organization and having a way for men to connect with each other and just talk about how their days are going, how their relationships are going is very important to both just making us happy individuals as well as our own mental health.
That's very true. I know isolation and loneliness is such a epidemic nowadays among the old. Just to share with you, I've noticed in the newspapers in the last few weeks, about 2 times a week. All right, just an average. I would read an article or a report about the neighbors finding a body in the next door flat. All right, and that's the body of an elderly person who lived alone, and he or she just passed away. Nobody knew until a few days later when they began to have that stench coming out from that apartment, and they called the police to break in the door, and they found that he or she has already passed away for a number of days. So this is really, really sad. It's sad, for any country to reach this point where people in their golden years supposedly are living alone, separated, alienated, isolated.
Right. And it's interesting that you bring that up because I believe and I could be wrong, but I saw something where I think the number one cause of death of older men in England has been more from suicide than it has been from any other cause. And it's because of that isolation. It's, friends uh, passing away, it's been family moving away, it's been all sorts of different reasons. But it's interesting that the suicide amongst older men is quite high.
Yes, it's also, well, I don't have the exact figures, but it feels like that's depression and suicide, which are usually connected. It's pretty prevalent in Singapore among the elderly. But what's more worrying is about the suicide rates among the young as 10 years old. And that is, yeah, really. So in Singapore, the government prime minister to be has announced that we're going to really enhance the mental health of Singaporeans, and they're going to make it a movement, a push. They're going to train more people to help in this area. Even the teachers are now recruited. General practitioners are recruited into this movement. Yeah, so it's really serious, and I think we need to nip it in the bud before it gets worse.
Oh, sure. And as part of that effort, are they going to be using resources like yours with these father and grandfather communities to also be helping with that? Because I find, too, with those connections, that sometimes it works great for both, right? It works great for the older men to have those connections with the youth, and the youth to have those connections with older men that can give some wisdom.
Yeah. I think it's we need a holistic and all of society approach to this. We cannot just depend on the mental health professionals like psychiatrists and psychologists. That's intervention. But if there are things that we know that causes these things, we can begin to prevent, like family relationships, right? Family relationships is, I guess, where it should all begin. I mean, we do have programs. I'm sure in the United States, I've read about it, even in Singapore, where they try to bring the two age groups, the elderly and the young, like students from schools, right? And make it a project, or make it, an experiential lesson where they will mingle the young and the old together. But this cannot happen every day, isn't it? So the elderly people would definitely be happy when the young children visit. But it's only for a few hours, and after that, they will leave. And how do you think the elderly person would feel? Well, I'm alone again. Right? So it's I don't know, in my opinion, it could make them, feel that I would rather they don't come and visit. Right?
So,
So I
yeah.
don't know.
And I think there has to be a combination of having shared interests around something, where I think, to your point, whereas you did a group of small children, they might go to a nursing home, they might go somewhere else, have that forced interaction for a little bit and then leave, becomes very disappointing, probably on both sides. But then if it was around an activity around something, where maybe games or something along those lines, where it's mutual interests, then I think that's what creates that relationships and those conversations, much more than that forced interaction.
Yes, I think if it happens organically, that would be wonderful. And where is the best place for that to happen? I guess it's in the family context, isn't it? When men reach a certain age, and this is, what I've read from Eric Erickson, who is a developmental psychologist, and he says that, kind of around the mid age, 45, 50, people enter this stage called generativity, where they are really looking to impact the next generation. And that's around the time where men become grandfathers and women become grandmothers. And that's where they really want to do something meaningful and make a difference in the next generation. And the next doesn't mean their own children. I think they had that opportunity, right, with their own children. And for many, they probably missed it. They would admit to you, I think, very readily that they did not do a good job. And so they're hoping for like a second chance, right, to be a parent. But this time is being a grandparent to their grandchildren. And for many, they were not given that opportunity. They do not have the opportunity. So I think the next best thing would be for them to be given opportunities to influence and to impact children, right? Whether it's in the mentoring capacity, or somehow mentoring the next generation, by telling stories, right? By, sharing life lessons, and talking about history, because, I think we can learn a lot from that.
Oh, we can. And there's many other ways, too, for some of the older grandfather-aged men to get involved. I've got one person that I'm connected with, and he's part of the Lego robotics club. And so I think he's the adult working with a lot of middle school, early high school age kids with that robotics, and with his background at Intel and some of these other things, that works great. And that's something that he really enjoys very much, is seeing what the kids come up with, what designs and what they have to work on And it gets you that feedback from somebody that's been an engineer, that's been working at Intel and has been in the high tech sector, to be able to understand, is that an industry, is that a career path that they might want to go down?
Mm.
Now, I would love to step back just a little bit and talk about your experience with being a grandfather, because I know there's more that I want to get to and talk to you about as far as some of these other topics around grandfathers in general. But I'd love to hear the story that you have of when you first found out that you were going to become a grandfather.
Well, first of all, I have two grandchildren. The elder one is about 3.5 years old, and the younger one, is about 1.5 years. So they're still in that very playful stage, right? And we don't get to see them a lot, although Singapore is a very small place, and it's not like we are living at the opposite ends of the island. We are actually within the same region. But my daughter and son-in-law, they're very busy people with work and with other activities, with friends. And so we kind of see them maybe once a month or things like that. Yeah, so every time we get a chance to do that, we try to make full use of it. When they were younger, sometimes our daughter would kind of call us for help, like babysitting help. And yeah, so these are, I guess, opportunities to support them. I think we are operating on this principle, so to speak, that every parent should try their best to manage on their own. And today, I guess we have much more services available to support parents, like childcare, infant care, and places like this. In the past, we did. It's not so readily accessible. Price is one thing. Today, it's I guess more affordable, although prices also have gone up. And with parents, especially two parents working, this becomes a necessity. So they have no choice but to make use of it. So when I first found out that I was going to be a grandfather, well, let me go back to the time that my daughter was getting married, and the emotion that I felt was definitely happiness, but also more of pride. Pride not in myself, because, I didn't do much to make that happen. But pride in her, that, she's able to come to this point of life and be able to move on to the next phase, which is becoming a wife, right? And then after that, becoming a mother. So it's really, really joyful to see your children progressing in life, right? And taking steps forward and taking on new responsibilities. And through that, I guess that's where growth, change happens in you, in your perspectives, in your outlook on life. And I do see that in her. She has changed in many ways, and yeah, I think that's all because of becoming a wife and then becoming a mother.
I can definitely relate to that, in that I think we have a similar mindset where, as my sons were getting older and getting married or going through school and getting jobs and things like that, is a little bit of a recognition of, like, okay, we got them this far. We've done a good job. They're moving, they're progressing, and being excited about that. But then also, to your point, being able to step back a little bit and enjoy watching their progression, from teenagers to young adults, and young adults starting to have families and take on and manage those life lessons and expectations of work and family.
Yeah, and it's also exciting to see, interesting sometimes to see the similarities between, the parents and the children, especially, one parent and the child, the kind of habits, behaviors, the way of thinking, decision-making process, and you really get to see it very, very clearly, at this later stage of life, And so when, for example, the other time, when they visited, all right, and my son-in-law was describing my daughter, and she's like that, and I said, Well, sounds familiar. That's exactly what I would do, all right. Okay. So I know where that came from now.
Sure, sure. Oh, that's awesome. And I've got to ask you too, are there any special activities when you go and see the grandchildren, even though they're pretty young still? Are there anything special that you tend to do where, hey, grandpa's here, we're going to, I don't know, get a special treat or go to the park or something?
Well, not exactly. Singapore is not like in America, right? Where one of the favorite pastimes is fishing. Over here, we don't really have places to go fishing. We can fly a kite, but as you can imagine, Singapore is a built-up place. So flying kites is also a challenge. You really need to go to there aren't many places to fly kites. So what can we do? I think depending on the parents, today the modern parents, they are can be quite particular, right, about spending too much time in the sun or certain kind of activities. So we do have to consult them first. Now, at this age of 3.5 and 1.5, what my wife has done is she's bought this, pack of little puppets where you put into your fingers, right? Different animals. And so she bought that, and the kids really loved it. So one time they visited us, right? So we took it out and played it with them, and they were, I think we spent like an hour doing that. And when they were about to leave, we asked our daughter, would you like to take this with you? And she said, no, leave it here so that the next time they come, they have something to play with, So that's become like, the thing that we use most, to play with them when they come. So I guess when they have outgrown that, we have to look for something else to do.
Oh, sure. No, that's wonderful. I love that idea of having some special toys or a special activity that's as grandpa and grandma's, and they can look forward to going and doing. Of course, visiting grandma and grandpa, but also having something fun that they don't have back at their house.
Yeah, something different, right? And so, hopefully they'll look forward to it, and they will really enjoy it while it lasts.
Oh, sure, sure. Now, another question I've got for you is that what has traditionally been the role of a grandfather in Singapore, or maybe with your background from China?
Well, in the past, grandfathers, we used to live in extended families, right? That means 3 generations under the same roof. And so the grandparents really do have a lot of opportunities to talk to the grandchildren and the children even. You can say that it was largely a patriarchal, family system, right? Where the elders is kind of the one in charge, right? The one who makes the major decisions and things like that, and has the greatest say in everything that happens in the family and in the household. But unfortunately, we have moved away from the extended family model, and now we are mostly, I think, maybe even 100% nuclear family. The only time that we are extended family is, where the adult children will allow one of the elderly parents to come live with them because they're just too old and somebody has to take care of them, so sadly, that is the situation right now. So today's grandparents or grandfathers do not have that kind of impact or influence on their children's lives. They play more like on a reserve role, right? When they are needed, they are called upon and to help. For some adult children, they do make it a point to visit, maybe most of the weekends. Some do not, depending on their schedule, depending also on their relationship. And there are some grandfathers or grandparents who they are almost like the surrogate parents. That means the grandchildren would live with the grandparents from Monday to Friday, and the grandparents would, shuttle them to preschool, kindergarten, childcare, and then maybe even to school. And the parents would come on a Friday, pick them up, Friday night to pick them up and go home. So the parents would have the kids for the weekend, and then on Sunday night, bring them back to the grandparents. So there are many different versions of grandparenting in Singapore right now.
And that's similar, I think, to the United States and other places as well, is that the role of family and the makeup of family and those dynamics seem to be changing based on what the circumstances are, not necessarily any kind of firm rules that anybody's being told about. I wanted to shift a little bit and get back to your work around fathers in the nonprofit. And you do a lot of work, especially around intergenerational reconciliation. And I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about that. How did that come about? And then how do you find the best way for estranged fathers and sons to maybe heal some old wounds?
Well, yeah, this is it's a topic very close to my heart because of my own personal experience with my father. So the backstory is that when I was 10 years old, my parents went through a divorce. And because I was closer with my mom, she was a stay-home mom, a housewife. And so we had a lot of time together. And so obviously my relationship was closer than my relationship with my dad. So when things started to change and well, a 10-year-old, as a 10-year-old, I couldn't understand what divorce actually is. But all I know that, the home is changing, the family is changing, the atmosphere at home is changing. We're not as happy as before. And, as a child, we think with our emotions first, right? So I felt something is wrong. I felt, there was instability. And, I didn't feel happy as much as I used to. And so I put the blame on my dad, right? And I said, it must be him who caused all this, right? And so from that day on, I kind of alienated myself from him. I kind of, did not respect him and did not want to have anything to do with him, and so it went on for many, many years, and, I couldn't wait to get married and move out. But we still lived under the same roof, all right? But I tried my best to avoid him. So, for example, in a week, I think I would only have, I would speak not more than one sentence with him, all right? And yeah. And then at the age of 34, I was already married, a father, and suddenly one day, a question popped into my head. And the question was, why are you angry with your father? So I said, well, he's the one who caused, the breakup of the family. So, there's this internal conversation happening in my head, right? It could be, one angel here and the devil here, I don't know. And then I stopped and I said, am I sure? Is that what really happened? And all of a sudden, I had this conviction that I better find out. Maybe I was wrong to be angry with him in the first place. So I called him up and I invited him over to my place. And I said, Dad, we need to talk. So he came over and I asked him, I said, what happened? So he told me his side of the story. And I realized that, I think there's always two sides to a story. And what happened after that was basically, I apologized to him. I asked for his forgiveness for being angry with him all these years for no reason, because I did not bother to find out what really happened, right? And I did it the Chinese way, right? Serving him tea, I knelt down and I served him tea, and he drank it, and so that was a first step in our reconciliation. Now that was when I was 34 years old. Fast forward 20 years, another question popped into my head, and this time it was, how well do you know your father? So I said, well, that's okay. Let me try. I started to list facts, all right, like fragments of information that I know about my father. So okay, he worked in a bank. He finished his what's known as the A levels, in the British system, and a few other things. He went to this school, and this and that. So I was able to name 5 things. Now I don't know about you, but to me that was a failure rate. All right, that was an F. All right, only 5 things I knew about my father, and one of the 5 things was not his birth date. I did not know his birth date all this time until I was 54 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, I was convicted, all right? And I called him again. I said, Dad, we need to talk. So he came over and we sat down for 1.5 hours. And the moment we sat down, I just simply asked him this. I said, tell me your story. And he looked at me and said, what story? Well, the story of your life from as far back as you can remember until today. I'm sure that would take a week to tell, but so we just got started for 1.5 hours. He gave me kind of an overview, about his childhood, about his school days, and as he was telling his story, I was thinking of the 5 facts, right? And right, and I said, okay, this one is right, this one is wrong, this one is wrong, this one is right, this one is wrong. So out of the 5 facts I thought I knew, 3 of them were wrong.
Oh.
Right? Where did I learn this from? I mean, who told me that this? So apparently I got the wrong information, right? So this information existed before today. Anyway, yeah. So I learned a lot. I learned about that he was actually a late bloomer, just like I was, and just like my son was. So I said, okay, that's something that runs in the family, and I began to understand. From his story, I began to understand why he said the things he said to me when I was younger. I began to understand why he, parented me the way he did. Okay. It's not an excuse, it's just an explanation. I began to understand it. And yeah, and so as I began to understand it, I kind of felt, all right, he was doing the best he could. And just like what I'm doing and have been doing, I'm just doing the best that I know how. Right. And so I began to have this empathy for him that, there's no reason to be angry. I mean, we can always find reasons to be angry with someone. But when you really hear the whole story, right, his background, his backstory, you will have this empathy. And that's what I found myself to have. Now, so out of this, I, use this story to share it with other fathers. Because I read a research that, your ability to be a father is heavily dependent or impacted by your relationship with your own father. And so I began to talk about this more and more with other fathers. In the workshops that I conduct, for example, I would bring this up, and I would ask the fathers, how do you rate your relationship with your own father, on a scale of 1 to 10? And, there's also other research that says, we often overestimate ourselves, right? So if people say they are at a 6, I tell them you're probably at a 4 or 5, So yeah, so do take into consideration what I'm going to share with you. So I shared with them the story, and I shared with them the 3 R's, and the 3 R's are, okay, number 1, to recognize your father, recognize the man. So what I did the second time around when I met with my father, I was basically wanting to get to know this man, right? Because I've known him as my father. And so when you know somebody as your father, you kind of have expectations, right? A father should be this, a father should be that. And when they're not, you kind of say, oh, he's not a good father. But we forget he's a man too, right? He was a boy, he became a teenager, he became a young man, fell in love, got married, had children, had you. How much of that do you know? So the first R I share with fathers is recognize. Recognize the man who happens to be your father. All right. Get him to tell your story, tell you his story. And when we were younger as children, our parents actually tried to tell us their story. But what's our reaction most of the time?
Yeah.
Boring. There he goes again, And I feel that too. I mean, I went through that. And so now I know how our parents felt. We want to share our lives. We want to tell them our stories, the lessons we learn, and this is who you are actually. But we were not allowed to. So, so I tell the adult children today, I said, you have to take the first step, just like I took the first step, right? I called my dad. I said, we need to talk. We sat down, and without any icebreaker, I went straight for the kill. Tell me your story. And he was reluctant at first. Oh, it's not interesting. I said, no, I want to hear. And then he started. So I want to assure dads out there, all right? Your fathers are waiting for you to ask. Tell me your story. They're waiting. They're dying to tell you. They have so much to share with you, good and bad. The things they've done well and the things they've not done well. They are waiting to tell you, but we just got to invite them. So if they have not received the invitation card, they will just keep quiet. So that's the first R.
Sure. Well, and I love that. And I just want to jump in is because part of that too is understanding back to what we talked about previously, is that they were sons, they were young men, they made mistakes. There was external forces that happened to them. They might have gone through a bad economic downturn. They might have gone through a lot of political upheaval, whatever that is. And that goes with them as they become fathers. And so to your point, that doesn't necessarily excuse bad behavior, but maybe there's a reason, or there's more of a backstory behind some of the things that they might have done. Now, what's the second R?
Well, the second R is reconciliation. Now, people ask me, why don't you start with reconciliation? Because I found that reconciliation, if you put that first, it becomes a bigger hurdle, right? Why should I forgive him? Why should I apologize? He's the one who has done the wrong thing. So if we start with reconciliation, I'm afraid it might be too big of a hurdle. So let's start with something easier, and that is just asking the question, tell me your story. But interestingly, when we start with recognition, just by listening attentively and listening carefully to our father's stories, like I said earlier, you will find most likely that you develop empathy. You begin to understand him, you begin to know him, and you begin to realize, oh, that's why he was like that. That's why he said the things he said. That's why he raised me the way he raised me. The philosophy in life and, and things like that. Oh, now I understand, So empathy is very important, and empathy will kind of lower your defenses, lower your, if I may say, self-righteousness, right? And kind of open the way for the next step, which is reconciliation, right? And reconciliation, now I also want to clarify, very often when we think about reconciliation, it's about saying sorry and, forgiving one another. Well, I'm sure that is very important, but it can take many forms, right? You can forgive someone without even saying, I forgive you. You can apologize without saying, I'm sorry, right? By many ways, just the things you say, the way that you conduct yourself after that, right? And show your remorse about the mistakes you have made and things like that. So yeah, we don't have to be locked into just, oh, you must say sorry. No, you don't have to, right? And your father must say sorry. No, he will say sorry in many, many different ways, in many, many words, and not just these two, I'm sorry. Okay, so you just got to listen for it, okay? And then the reconciliation will happen. Now, how do we know the reconciliation has truly happened? And that's the third R, is that we reconnect. And reconnect simply means to have that father-son relationship that you should have had, but did not, right? But now it's like decades later. Is it too late? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. And if your father is still alive and well, relatively well, you can still reconnect. You can still have that father-son relationship, that you did not have. And I can tell you, if you do that, all right, to whatever measure that is possible, you will find healing and restoration for yourself, and you will find your fathering changing for the better. And not only that, later on, I also realized that because I was angry with my father and I just didn't want to have a relationship with him, my children were deprived of a relationship with their grandfather. Okay? So that reconciliation, that restoration, repair and restoration of that relationship between me and my dad, or any adult child with their fathers, will not only benefit them, will not only benefit, the father, the elderly father, but will also benefit the grandchildren. So 3 generations will benefit from that simple act, right? The very simple act of just calling up your father, sitting down with him and saying, tell me your story. 3 generations will have the benefits.
Oh, I love that. And it's so important for us to make that effort. I mean, we can only control what we can control. So our fathers or the other individuals, it's going to be up to them to, be part of this. And hopefully they want to, but if they can't and they won't, then knowing that, okay, I've made every effort that I can on my side to bring those 3 generations together is, I think, super important. And then also there's a personal little bit of peace, because I think one of the things is we see our older parents, aunts, uncles, whoever, as they pass, when we have unresolved issues with them, they still take a long time for us to find peace with as well.
Yeah. And I have spoken with fathers who asked me, okay, that's something I really want to do, but what do I do if my father has passed away? Okay, that makes it a little bit challenging, but not impossible. So I would say, is your mom still alive? Yes. Well, interview her, right? Ask her, tell me what that was like. If you have uncles, aunts, or if you know of any of your father's friends, old neighbors, for example, interview them. So what you're basically doing is gathering information and bits and pieces and try to piece them together and form that big jigsaw puzzle, right? And yes, there will still be pieces missing, but at least you're beginning to see something that resembles your father and understand him a little bit better. So it's not impossible. It'll be a little bit more challenging, but it's worth doing. It's really worth doing.
And then that can also be a sense of rewarding as well, going through that effort and talking to, like you said, aunts and uncles, maybe old neighbors, friends of your father, because by doing that, you'll also get to know them a little bit more, and you'll also get to understand their stories a little bit more.
That's right. That's right. And I want to really make a very important point here about who should take the initiative. The adult children would tend to think that, well, he should come to me first. He should take the first step. All right. You might be right. And I think that the elderly father feels that too, that I should, go to my son and to make things right. But we are still humans, right? They are still humans. And we fear rejection. What if I go to my son, who's now an adult, who is now a father, and I try to reconcile with him, I try to say sorry, and he rejects me right out, So a lot of us would not like that kind of experience, and we kind of tell ourselves, oh, he will not forgive me, he will not forgive me. And so we delay, right? And months turn into weeks, and into months, into years, and then before you know it, it's kind of too late. So I want to say, the adult children should take the initiative. They must take the initiative, right? And I know adult children who are now fathers would say to me, and many have said to me, why should I? Why should I be the one to forgive him? He should apologize, and then I'll think about forgiving him. I said, well, am I right to say you have a problem with your father? He said, yes, definitely. Then you have the problem. Right? The problem is you. You are holding the problem. You're carrying the problem. And if you want that problem to go away, don't expect your dad to come and take it off of your shoulders. You have to unload it. You have to take it off yourself. And the best way to do it is to go and talk to your father. Right? So if you have a problem with your dad or with anyone else, you have a problem, not the other person. So you have to deal with it.
Oh, I love that, and that's such good advice. And Parcsen, I've had you on for a little bit, but I do want to talk about the Better Man podcast, as well as some of the other things that you have going on that people can connect with you and learn more about the great work that you're doing with fathers.
Well, thank you. Yes, the Better Man podcast is new. We've just recorded our second episode. Why did we start that? Now, it's three of us, and actually we hardly know each other. We just met quite recently. Early last year, I started this new initiative called Mangroves, and it's for men. It's basically about helping men thrive together, not just individually, although we want to do that also. But at the end of the day, we want men to thrive together. That means, they should be in a community, right? And then helping each other out. And I got to know this other guy who also is doing something very similar in Singapore, and he's also trying to help men in Singapore. So I contacted him and I said, hey, we are all doing different things, but with the same objectives. And I know that we all have different strengths and talents and abilities, and maybe even slightly different emphasis on certain aspects of manhood. But I'm sure there's a place we can do something together. And so I suggested, why don't we do a podcast? And he said, yeah, why not? Let's do it. And then I met another guy, and he's a therapist. And I met another guy who is a social worker, and he is, working in an organization that does a lot of helping families that experience domestic violence, And he was really excited too. He says, hey, I'm also very, keen on helping men. So I said, all right, join the podcast. So there we have a trio. We are talking about different, topics. And yeah, so we've just started. So check it out, Better Man Podcast on Spotify, and also where? On YouTube.
Oh, that's great. And if folks want to get in touch with you, is there a good way? Are there any social media places to go to get in contact with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on, if you want to follow us on Telegram, it's t.me/mangroves SG, SG for Singapore. So mangroves with the S and then SG, all right, one whole word. So that's one way you can follow us and know what we're doing.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'll be sure to put links to those in the show notes.
Really appreciate that.
So people can get connected with you. Is there anything about fathers or about being a grandfather that I haven't asked you that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I want to, always remind fathers that about this quotation that I read, if parenting has not changed you, you've probably done it wrong. I think you know what I mean, right? Because when we become parents, we have this thinking that, all right, it's now my job to raise this child, to teach this child, to correct all his or her, misbehaviors, bad behaviors, unacceptable behaviors, right? So it's like now we're on this project, and the project is this child. But wait a minute. We are the project too, because we are not finished. We are still work in progress. And marriage and father and parenthood are actually the next stages in life and the next stages in our personal growth and development program, if I may call it, right? And we need to see it that way. Otherwise, at the end of the day, we find that we have not grown, we have not become a better person, as a result of becoming a spouse or a parent. Right? So I encourage parents to see it that way. This is your personal growth and development program. Invest into it, but let it challenge you. You will be challenged. Your patience will be tested, right? But you will learn many, many new skills or improve in the skills that you already have, like communication, compromise, negotiation, empathy, and being sensitive to people's feelings and things like that. You'll find yourself becoming better at these things and therefore making you a better person. Now, there was this book that I came across. I have not read it, but I came across it, and it says, if you have raised children, you can do anything. Right? And it's a book on leadership, actually.
Right.
So it's written by a woman who is a mother, and her premise of the entire book is that I am a mother, and I'm also a leader of a great big corporation. Where did I learn my management skills from? It's not from some MBA or executive MBA or any kind of programs. It's from mothering, right? I learned leadership through mothering. I learned how to communicate. I learned how to empathize. I learned how to listen, and the whole premise of that book is. And so I always tell fathers, I said, see this book? If it can work for mothers and women, it can work for men too. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
So if you want to be a better leader, be a better father.
I love that. That's great. Parcsen, I want to just thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. This has been a great way to get to know you, and I just love the work that you're doing down there in Singapore.
Come visit us.
I just got my passport, so I need to go start to use it again.
All right. But thank you,
right.
Greg. Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to share on your podcast. And I want to say hi to all the dads and granddads out there. You're doing great. You are doing well. You're doing your best. And that's all that anyone can ask for. All right. So, yeah, no judgments. And don't be nice to yourself.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, thanks again for being on the show.
All right. Have a nice day.
I enjoyed having Parcsen on the podcast. I really did enjoy how he was going through his 3 R's, and that the first one is to recognize the person, recognize the fact that they had a lot of history in their background as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, that brought all those experiences into their lives as they became parents, and that sometimes trying to do your best, you just make mistakes, which can cause a rift or a separation in relationships. So I enjoyed how he's focused on helping men, helping people really get reconnected and reconcile with their parents, with their aunts and uncles, maybe with old mentors that they might have had a falling out. If you would like to learn more about Parcsen, I'm definitely going to be putting links to his LinkedIn as well as his Better Man podcast into the show notes, along with a couple of other ways you can get connected with Parcsen. And I really enjoyed the fact that the Cool Grandpa can put a flag in Singapore, that we've had some representation from that great place on the globe. And we continue to talk about the importance of grandfathers in the lives of the families and in our communities. So I hope you got a lot out of this. I hope it sparks some imagination, some conversation within yourself so that you can work on maybe reconciling with people that you might be having a strained relationship with. And until next time, I want you to remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.reconcile.com www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.